Call the Committee of the Whole workshop to order. Stand for the pledge, please.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call.
Roll call, Trustee O'Rourke.
Here.
Trustee Peck.
Here.
Trustee Rassich. Trustee Wajowski.
Here.
Trustee Benucci.
Here.
Trustee Lamb.
Here.
Mayor Collins. We're seeking board consideration of a motion to appoint Trustee Lamb as this evening's chair.
That's my motion.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Trustee O'Rourke.
Yes.
Trustee Peck.
Yes.
Trustee Wajowski.
Yes.
Trustee Benucci.
Yes.
Trustee Lamb.
Yes.
Thank you. That motion carries. We're seeking a motion to approve the minutes of the special meeting and Committee of the Whole workshop held on August 22nd.
So move.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. That motion carries. Presidential comments?
I was on for the president tonight.
Trustees' comments?
I just had one question maybe for Alan. I'm not sure if you have the answer, but I'll ask, so sorry for the quiet zone. I know there was some talk about putting together the pre-application meeting. Just curious if any of that has taken place, if it's moving forward or where we're at. Do you know?
Yeah, we continue to make progress on that. The material for the delineators has been ordered. It should be in any time because that does increase our point number as far as the application is concerned. And the city of Joliet, again, is partnering with Plainfield to work on the quiet zone. So it is moving forward. Application will be submitted well before the end of the year.
Thank you.
Are there any other trustee comments?
Question for Alan. As far as the ITEP applications go, what's the normal turnaround time for the state to get back to us when we ask for our different grants?
Probably a couple of months. It's been slower this year, and we haven't received any feedback as of yet. And there's a few, not only the one that we have for Plainfield, but there's other ones that are beneficial regionally that have been submitted through the county and the township. So as soon as we get the information back, we'll share it with the board and with the public too as well.
Great. Thank you very much, Alan.
Are there any other trustee comments? If there are no trustee comments, this would be the time for public comments. If there are no public comments, then we'll proceed with the workshop. The first item on the agenda is review of proposed zoning code amendments.
Thank you very much. This evening's discussion is really in two parts. Staff has taken a handful of projects that have been through the formal zoning code text amendment process before the Plan Commission with a public hearing and then to the Village Board for consideration at various times, and as well a few items that have been considered or proposed as part of a Committee of the Whole discussion. And so staff has tried to pull these various text amendment proposals together into one package, one set of red lines. Staff felt it would be efficient for the board's consideration and approval and for our codifier and so forth to try and pull everything together and have one go of it. So the first part of tonight's presentation is to focus on those specific proposals. It's staff's hope that they're on the mark or very close to the mark, and taking into consideration any input the board might have tonight, staff would be prepared to bring forward a request to have the village attorney prepare an ordinance to implement these zoning code text amendments as soon as next Monday at Monday's village board meeting. Certainly if there are some questions, if we need to make some mid-course corrections, that the timing's not an issue, but the first part of the discussion is to review those specific proposed zoning code text amendments. The second part is really just to have a little bit of an introduction into the sign code. Staff wasn't quite prepared to come forward with specific recommendations in terms of amending the sign code, but staff would like to at least outline the purpose and intent of the sign code, kind of the zoning ordinance's legal grounding, the framework for how we regulate signs, touch on what impact signage can have on the overall appearance of the community, and look at a few different trends and areas where there may be some changing either trends or technologies in signage that would warrant some modifications to the zoning code. So having said that, I'll jump into kind of the first part, the specific redlined amendments. The first and perhaps most significant is adjusting how certain uses are classified in the permitted use matrix, which is at the beginning part of the zoning code. It outlines all the various zoning districts in a column format, and then lists the various uses that we have. And staff was directed to identify a handful of uses as special uses, as opposed to being permitted by right. So those would include financial services. Staff has kind of broadened and provided a definition for secondary financial markets. That would include such things as currency exchange, but also auto, title, payday, advanced payday loan type businesses. So those would be identified now as requiring a special use in the B3 zoning district. We have flea markets. Previously were permitted by right in the B3 district, would now require a special use approval. Staff has separated the massage therapy component of a prior grouping of uses, and that massage therapy use would now require special use approval in the B1, B3, and B5, and business transition and I1 zoning districts. Under personal services, beauty, nail, and tanning salons would now require a special use consideration, and as well body art services in the B3 zoning district. And likewise for fortune telling. And then lastly, staff added a specific use definition or use category for tobacco sales. That would be the principal sales as opposed to being considered just a general retail. So tobacco sales, including vapor cigarettes, would require a special use consideration in the B3 zoning district. So that's kind of the first category. I don't know if Trustee Lamb, if we should pause after each kind of grouping for discussion, or if you'd like me to run through the series, I can run through. The rest aren't quite as detailed.
Want to run through the spreadsheet? Or,
For the other proposed changes.
oh, let's see if there are any comments first on the spreadsheet. I don't have any comments. I think it sums up nicely the things that we've discussed, but see what the rest of the board has to say.
One comment about fortune-telling services. If my memory serves me properly, I believe in 2008 we had somebody use the term intuitive services, and they said they weren't a fortune teller, and we asked them what the difference was, and they couldn't answer us, and they said they didn't need to. So I don't know if you have a definition of fortune telling, if you want to include intuitive services or any other synonyms or adjectives that you can think of that would also fall under it to make sure we're covered, so that way if we have that come up again, we can say, no, it does fall under fortune telling. That would be my comment on it.
That makes perfect sense. I think you may have commented on that before, because in my notes I had to add a definition.
Okay.
Fortune telling, we do have a definition, so that the light bulb just went off. It's to expand that definition to make sure it's broad enough to include the intuitive consulting businesses.
Consulting.
Okay, I will add that. Thank you.
But just out of curiosity, aren't they people we discussed back then in operation currently on Main Street?
Nope, that's business
Something else?
relocated, and anyway, no, it's not currently operating.
Okay. Thanks. Any other comments on the,
I guess a comment, or maybe it's more of a question. So I think at the last meeting we had some conversations, there were a number of couple other categories that were included. I don't have the minutes to that meeting, so I don't know where we ended up, but I had some notes, and I think there was some talk about child care and auto supply as well. Do you have any notes?
There were a handful of uses that staff's understanding of the consensus, at least, was that those would not have the special use requirement. There were certain, I think, banks. I didn't bring my file up, but yeah. So yeah, I did not have make a note of direction for that.
they've all come through as special cases, haven't they? We review those and come through the plan commission, and it comes to us, and we've, so it gets a fair amount of discussion, which is, I think, what we were after when we made these changes, make sure that we had a chance to weigh in and understand what was happening, so those already come to us, don't they?
In terms of auto,
Childcare, autos,
not specifically, they would, like a preschool would, preschool daycare type of use would in most zoning districts, not, the auto parts, would not.
auto parts are a retail business, so, yeah. Okay.
Those require special use and in the right zoning district, they don't need to come before any board, I believe.
That's correct, yeah.
So the question is, do we want to have childcare and auto supply, because those were the other two I saw on the list, come for special use. If you thought they were getting more review, Bill, and they're not, maybe it's something that you would like to continue to see that they do.
If I can preface this discussion just briefly with an overview, I know this is reinforcement, I think for the board. In the zoning code, when a use is identified as a special use, there's a presumption that it's permitted, that it's appropriate in the absence of any specific impacts that would be generated by that use. So, for example, a school might have traffic impacts. An auto repair business might have noise impacts that would make it inappropriate in one location where it's adjacent to a neighborhood, but appropriate in another location that's strictly, highway auto oriented. So when we're looking at different uses and considering whether they should be special uses or not, the presumption is that they're appropriate. But on a case-by-case basis, you'd look and see if there are any impacts. So as we add special uses, I guess I would suggest the question will be what potential impacts would there be from a business or a use that would give the board reason to suggest it's not appropriate at that specific location.
That's the key, isn't it? If it's affecting an area disproportionately to being somewhere else, then it should come before the board. That mechanism is already in place, correct? Say the auto repair shop wants to go up next to a neighborhood, the noise, the neighbors are complaining about the noise,
Yes,
and then
auto
it'll come
repair,
back.
correct, yes. If we're talking about auto parts supply as a potential business, that's a case where that are currently as general retail, an additional auto parts store could come in and simply obtain a business license, the appropriate certificate of occupancy, and begin operation.
What I'm getting at is if it adversely affects the neighborhood or the citizens living there, there's a mechanism in place for it to come before the board without generally laying another layer of government on for everybody who wants to open a daycare center to have to go and jump through more hoops to get their business license. I'm not necessarily in favor of that and leaving it, I'd like to leave it the way it is. There's nothing in place for, right, and I'm in favor of leaving it the way it is for the childcare and the auto parts stores.
As far as an auto parts store, I don't see any negative impact. It's not an auto repair
Right.
facility. If you look at Napa, that's in a strip mall, used to be in the strip mall by Tischler's right up against a subdivision, and that, from what I can tell, did not adversely affect anybody living there. I could see an auto repair place, which is a completely different story, as apples to oranges. So as far as the auto supply store, I have no objection to leaving it as is, and I'm pretty ambivalent on the childcare. Do we have any major problems that we're facing with childcare, why we need to change this? Is there a scenario that, is causing a problem that makes us need to make that change? If not, leave well enough alone.
And typically it's R1 and they have to be licensed by the state anyway.
FS, I think.
Yeah, so they would come out and, for the childcare. And again, the same thing with the auto parts. I think the repair needs to be the special use, but the parts is just a store. What?
I think part of the discussion, and again, I think this goes back to Michael when he said that he put the list together. These two items are not mine list or mine list, it's just what showed up. I think part of the discussion on the childcare was, number one, I think there were two issues. One was in the residential district, where you can do it on your own. What kind of traffic and parking does that create? And number two, if you're in the more of a business district, what kind of volume or traffic and those kinds of things as well. So it's back to that access. Vehicular traffic just, sometimes.
Don't we have to approve that?
I think that's the reason it was originally on.
With leaving it as is, unless we have, if it's not broken, don't fix it, unless we have reports that, there's a particular area that's, suffering congestion because of this, and then we can, maybe bring it back, but I'm okay leaving it as is.
Now, don't they get reviewed anyway? Because when that one school was trying to open, when that people bought that home right off of Eastern and 126 at that time, and they were going to put in like a school thing there. They wound up not doing it, but I think it was just too costly to convert it.
Right.
But
So in
we
our,
went through quite an approval process and review and traffic review and how the cars were going to come in and out and how many were going to be there. So is that, I mean, without it being special use, that was already brought to us that way, was it not?
because that property was zoned R1, so just to review, I know there are a
Aren't
couple
they R1?
couple different-
That was, yeah.
different but similar uses. There's a listing for child care facility, there's a listing for preschool, and there's a listing for a daycare home. And for the most part, those uses would require a special use currently in a residential district, but would be permitted by right in the some certain business districts, and or require special use in the B3, which is the highway-oriented business district. So, child care facilities currently require special use in B3. Preschools would currently require a special use in B3, but a daycare would be permitted by right in the B3 zoning district. I believe it's similar to, and staff's understanding of the board's intent here is to really make sure that there are the adequate tools in place for achieving our vision, your vision for the village of Plainfield, and regulating potentially where some of these businesses would go. I think one consideration is preserving our retail space for more retail restaurant opportunities. So I think there's a concern. Certainly staff has the concern and would understand if the board shared it, of having an over-concentration of uses. So the special use process allows for a case-by-case evaluation in certain locations.
My point of view, support leaving it the way it is. I think it's working. We can always fix it later if we see we have a problem, so. I think the changes we've suggested here are in line with what we were asking for.
John?
So, jumping back into the red line now, it's just 2 pages, but it kind of distills things down. The second major area of change was to incorporate specific zoning provisions for food trucks. So food trucks were added into the permitted use matrix, and then I had a handful of provisions. Those would include the requirement for the food truck operator to receive a permit through the village, and staff's current proposal is that permit would essentially be the village's business license, but for food trucks or mobile food units, they would also need to provide proof of their appropriate permitting through the health department, whether it's the Will County or Kendall County Health Department. The fire district also has its own set of guidelines and recommendations for food trucks. So staff would verify compliance with those, or have the operator demonstrate compliance with those. And then the third provision would be demonstrating proof of registration in terms of the sales tax collection or applicable tax through the state. Staff is also proposing that the location where food trucks operate, so if this is a stationary kind of a pre-scheduled event where they would go from 2 to 4 as an example. I know the library frequently has food trucks as part of their activities. The host location would also receive a permit, so that's an opportunity for staff to evaluate where the food truck will go and make sure it's compatible with the site plan. It's not occupying required parking. It's not occupying a drive aisle that would be a potential traffic or safety consideration. So that's proposed via subsection C here. Item D just reflects the village's current stated policy that food trucks are permitted on private property with the property owner's consent, but they're not permitted on public rights of way. Staff did carve out an exception for special events. So for example, cruise nights or Plainfield Fest, depending on the location, staff would anticipate the possibility of food trucks, and the current zoning code as drafted would allow for that. E indicates that food trucks are to be accessory. They aren't a principal use on a lot, so whether you have a vacant building or a vacant lot, staff would propose restricting or not allowing a food truck to come up and operate as the principal activity on a lot, that it needs to be in accessory to an existing business or activity. And then item F indicates that the food trucks would be restricted to staying not more than 72 hours consecutively at a location. So I can pause there for discussion for this section or this category.
Comments?
For F, where it's not to exceed 72 hours, how do you manage that? Because we know what we're talking about. We have people that want to actually have them next to another business. And who's going to manage that they moved it after 72 hours or whatever? First of all, I think 72 hours is too long. If you have a special situation like Plainfield Fest where you might be there for a couple days, that's a whole different special use. I could see that as a special requirement or designation for an extraordinary thing. But for someone to just have it there, not have to move it every 3 days, define move it. So I drive it out to the street and back it right up, and I'm right back there. I still think that it's not following the intent. The intent to me when I hear mobile food trucks is that they move around to different places. They might be at, the area over off of Eastern. They might be at Plainfield Fest. They might be at the car show, whatever the case may be, or at the library, or as Bill mentioned before, over by Edward Hospital, moving around in a continuous way. The 72 hours, I would not agree to that.
Is there an hour limit that you would find okay? Is it 24 hours? Is it 12 hours? Is it?
Well, it's two parts. I could go at 24 or 48, but define moving it. I'm just saying is if you have someone that wants it permanently there, it's like moving your car from one side of the street to the other, to avoid the 3-hour minimum, parking thing. I mean, so you're going to pull out and then put it back. I moved it.
If I may jump in, because that's a great observation. I neglected to consider that or see how that comes into play. One potential way to address that would be to add a calendar day limitation. So a food truck cannot operate on a specific property more than 21 calendar days in a year, just arbitrarily, as for discussion or to demonstrate how that could work, which would kind of by default indicate that they couldn't stay for prolonged periods. And in addition, because the 72-hour, that was really trying to limit the number of days.
Mm-hmm.
Consequence. So if we were to reduce the number of hours, have an hourly limit that's more in keeping with an event, it could be 12 hours. So that sort of indicates somebody's going to come for the day. And then in addition, limit a certain number of calendar days per year per location. I think would hopefully get closer to.
I'd like to jump in on that if you're.
Go ahead.
So what Trustee Benucci had said, though, as far as enforcement goes, how are we going to enforce how many calendar days someone is really there? Can I suggest maybe a cooling off period? They're there for whatever amount of hours our consensus comes to, whether it's 24, 48, probably not going to be 72. What if there's a 48-hour cooling off period or whatever we want to call it? And I think as far as enforcement, then it would be complaint driven versus having our code enforcement officers out there with a stopwatch figuring out, wait a minute, they've been there for 73 hours, got to give them a ticket.
Yeah, it'd be impossible to manage, you're right.
Yeah, I think it'd be complaint driven, and I think it'd be easier to manage as far as giving them a cooling off period versus X amount of calendar days a year. I'm not sure what everyone else thinks.
Yeah,
I'm going to ask Commander Novak to kind of weigh in just this because more than likely over nights and weekends it will very likely fall to a police department call. How do you see this written from the point of view of being able to manage that?
From the management point, I guess we'd have to figure out obviously how many permits we're going to receive each year. I mean, if it's a minimal number, I can see us by all means following up with it. Similar to that of the restricted time parking that we get downtown, CSOs can commonly check on it. We would just need the permits as far as the dates and times that it's acceptable. And during the normal course of their business, their hours, I'm sure they can have somebody delegated down just to check to see if they had moved in that reasonable period of time that was given. I don't see it being overwhelming at this point, but if it becomes too much of an issue, a problem, then maybe yes, we look at a complaint-driven one as opposed to following up. But I don't venture to see that you're going to have that many mobile food unit permits coming in that rapidly to where we'd have to worry about it just inundating the response times.
From my point of view, I like the 72 hours. That allows you to, Plainfield Fest and others, set up on Thursday if you want to and continue through Sunday by the time things are wrapped up. So it gives them plenty of time to service their customers, if you will. As far as the number of days, I agree with Commander Novak. I think we can probably enforce it the way it is now. Something we haven't seen, I keep hearing about, gourmet food trucks. And if you really have somebody like that, maybe they want a day a week where they set up someplace. And if we limit the number of days there, I think that may create complications. However, maybe we can find a way of special permit. You can have something other than what's here with special authorization of the staff or the board, whatever you want, which gives a little bit of flexibility and at least shows that we're interested in people who want to come in. The one we were concerned about, I think they're putting in a permanent structure now, the one on Main Street, not on Main Street, but Michigan. And that's, are they proposing a permanent structure?
Staff's continuing to work with them on what we feel is the best solution. So there may be a variance request forthcoming. In fact, there's a meeting, we'll meet with them tomorrow to consider the potential for a variance that would allow for a conventional addition to the building.
Okay.
Would
Well, at
be
least they're not, it's not a mobile truck anymore, at least.
That's correct.
Okay.
We have some other issues, but not that. Okay.
I'm not,
Sorry.
Oh.
not opposed to the 72 hours either. I think if it's, as Commander Novak said, if there's not an over influx of applications all at once, they should be able to handle it. It's not that hard of an issue. I mean, I can't see more than 4 or 5 the first year. And if it becomes an issue, then we can always readdress it. It's not written in stone forever. I think this is fair and good.
I guess I was against them before. I'm still against them. So the more restrictive we could make it, the happier I will be. I think my concern is what the demand is going to be. I think in an urban setting, I think it's a little bit different where you have 50,000 people working in an office complex within a half-a-mile radius, and the existing restaurants just physically cannot serve those people within an hour and 15 minutes during lunch hour. I don't think we have a desert of food in our town, and I think we have a lot of entrepreneurs that have spent a great deal of money establishing and building their business restaurants, and I don't know that this creates a level playing field with somebody putting a smaller investment into a truck coming in and what I would describe as taking a share of the stomach, as they call it in the business. So there's a certain amount of people that are in a certain area over lunchtime, and their choices are X. If you add additional choices, that means less people are going to the brick and mortar, who obviously have a higher cost of entry to get into the business. So that's my concern. I don't think, when it comes to Plainfield Fest, I think that's more kind of an amusement or a fair type of venue. I think there it fits in very well, but I think just generally to have it all year round, I'm still against it. So the more restrictive, for me, the better.
What would that restriction be, if you don't mind? I'm still trying to get a sense of what that hour restriction might be.
3 hours?
Okay.
One day. One day.
But what if they offer something which isn't offered by a bricks and mortar place? Gourmet food especially, or something like that, which is what I keep hearing about. They're offering something which is not available locally. You're saying, well, you got to go to use a thing which people discuss for a long time. The restaurant in town that was protected to keep Portillo's out. I'm not sure we want to prevent people from going for what they want.
No, and I'm not saying we necessarily have to protect. I think it just has to be what I would describe as, more of a level playing field. That's all. I mean, if somebody wants to take the risk and come in and do something, that's fine. But, I mean, I think there's always arguments you can make. Well, this guy's going to serve X, and then he comes in and serves X, and it finds out maybe it's not selling as well, so now he's adding Y and Z to the menu, which does compete against existing restaurants. So.
really succeeds as a food truck, maybe the local restaurants will pick up what he's selling too. This is called, competitive interchange
Yep.
marketplace, and let people buy what they want, I guess is where I'm coming from. Make it too restrictive, it's going to be a long discussion, but anyway, I'd rather see it stay kind of the way it is.
You have some guidance here, John?
One option would be to restrict the number of hours for a community event. So for Plainfield Fest, we could leave it at the 72 hours, or we could have fewer hours. In terms of the proposal itself, really reflects the board's policy, I would say verbal, policy that staff has at least provided to people when they come in with requests. We would currently consider it as a temporary use and bring it before the village board for direction on a case-by-case basis. So staff intended to try and reflect that, but with some further refinements based on the recent proposal for a stationary kind of year-round operation, something that would address that.
John, do we collect sales tax from those venues?
The village does not in itself, and to be honest, I don't know how the operators collect or should collect taxes. I don't know how they
But they don't pay to the
paid and
village, so
come to from the state to us.
it's kind of a deal breaker.
The only taxes that get paid directly to us on a sales tax portion is the gasoline tax. All of the other taxes go to the state and then get paid back to the village. Isn't that correct, Tracy?
Right, and depending on where they're registered and how they file their sales tax to the state is where that revenue goes. So not knowing where these businesses are located and where that revenue goes, and plus if we're talking food, it's a different taxing structure based on what they're serving too, because some food is not.
So it wouldn't come back to us in any form. Kind of a deal breaker.
I spent about 3 hours of my afternoon today speaking with a business owner that operates food truck service. And I learned some different things I didn't know, reiterated some things I didn't agree with everything that was presented. But some examples and information, data-driven information that they provided was that the city of Chicago has less than 150 food trucks. Los Angeles has over 10,000. So as far as the quantity that we're going to see come into the village, I don't know if it's going to be the food truck apocalypse and we're going to have a food truck at every corner, which obviously we don't want. The point that Trustee Benucci mentioned about the sales tax, that's absolutely right. Unless that person's business is registered in the village of Plainfield, which is their IBT number is tied to, we're not going to collect sales tax from it. But we are going to hopefully collect motor fuel tax when they fill their truck up at the gas station and leave Plainfield to go to their next stop. Yeah, well, yeah, if it is, you never know nowadays. They do have those EcoBoost V6s that tow 9,000 pounds. So I think that kind of counterbalances it there. To what Trustee O'Rourke had presented, he had mentioned that he had felt that there's a possibility, and again, there's no real data to show this, that it may pull business from another business owner. I have to argue, when I've used a food truck, I was driving past one that was parked, and I didn't plan on stopping in that community to eat at all. I was on my way home. I probably would have gone to a drive-thru, but instead I went to a food truck and got some quesadillas and a burrito versus McDonald's. So would I have spent money in that community? I would have spent it just somewhere. And maybe I would have waited till I got to the next town or two over and saw something better. So I really don't know if we really have any data to show it's going to pull from a particular business to another. The granular things, though, that I wanted to go over, and I have most of them taken care of, was going to be the parking on public streets. I would hate to see a food truck be allowed to park on Lockport Street right in front of one of our restaurants and then serve the same thing they serve, right? That's not fair competition because of overhead expense, location, property tax, and everything else that's involved in being in downtown Plainfield. But for example, if someone has a first communion party or a bar mitzvah at their house, and a lot of times their driveway is being used for, seating and everything, can a food truck be in front of their house for an hour or 2 or 3 for a very short duration? I'm not sure. That may eliminate one possibility for a food truck to serve in a residential area. I wouldn't want to see a food truck parked on the corner, next to my house for 8 or 10 hours while I'm, enjoying my privacy in my home, but I think there may be a way to incorporate something like that. And I don't know if it's a special permit or however you'd want to do it to allow it on the public street for a private event. A block party, I think, would probably fall under events that you already have in here, like Plainfield Fest. But something else like a large private party. The business owner that I spoke with also had compared Downers Grove as unfavorable and Tinley Park to very favorable. Pretty much, he and she had said they won't even go to Downers Grove because it's so intrusive. It pretty much pushes that market out, and they don't want to deal with it. The permitting fees would overcome any potential profit they would make by visiting that community, so they go to another community instead where it's less invasive. So I would be concerned about the price, and I think that price that they would have to pay for their permit would help replace the sales tax that we're missing as well. I would join Trustee Lamb and Wojo on the 72 hours, but I would want a cooling off period, whether it's 24 hours or 48. I would want them to be able to back up off the property and then pull it back in and say, I moved. Because not everyone has intentions to do that, but sooner or later someone's going to. I've seen it happen in different situations with homeowners associations. So I would like to see that. And that's, for the most part, my comments. If anyone has any feedback or anything else, I'd be happy to go over more of my conversation with that business owner if they want, but I've pretty much spoken my piece tonight.
I just had a
John-
question on that, sorry. So I think that was good information, and that was more from the truck guy side of it?
Yes, from the business owner that operates a food truck.
Did you get a chance to talk to any other existing brick and mortar guys, just get their opinions on it?
Yes,
They
I
don't
have.
want it.
Thoughts?
They don't want it. They don't want it.
Not favorable.
Well, John, how does that, to Trustee Peck's point, how does that fit in with, like, the private thing is more of a catering type of situation? So if, like, you had that for something you were doing, whether we have some venues, party venues around now that use those, sometimes the weddings have those. So would that be more of a, would they fit more in the realm of being a catering at that point? For a special event like
Exactly.
that?
I think that's how it functions, or that's how staff foresees it being the vast majority of the time, where the food truck is being incorporated into an event, temporary, short-term in nature, where there isn't currently a restaurant or a food option. So it's really serving an unserved population. So I could provide specific examples, but I think generally speaking, be it a special event venue or associated with a special event, or some businesses that have, special activities.
Since this is a workshop just for information purposes, do you have enough input to come up with a document you think we want to pass?
I definitely think there were some rough edges that the trustees' comments have addressed, and so staff will be prepared to refine this, and whether it's included in the full presentation at an upcoming board meeting, we can always adjust it then or work further, but certainly staff will implement some modifications to address tonight's discussion.
Okay, thank you.
And the last two are much more straightforward. Staff is proposing one direct change to the sign code, and then I know we'll have a little bit more open-ended discussion of the sign code following here. This would be to specifically prohibit the outline of storefront windows with LED or similar lighting. That's something that's become, I don't want to say widespread, we certainly have a handful of examples currently in the village. Staff had, through interpretation, discouraged that, but it's our preference to have a specific prohibition here added to the sign code that would give code enforcement the appropriate tools to address that. I know it's a concern of staff's. It's been raised at Coffee with the Mayor and otherwise, so staff feels that it's there's consensus to restrict that type of lighting. And then the last proposed change. is
Any
simply-
comments on that one? So we're going to a separate one.
Oh, I agree with that. I mean, I've been through some communities when they have the bright lights around the windows at night. It's distracting as you drive by. It doesn't look nice either.
Everybody okay with that then?
Yeah, I think that's good. I just had a question more than anything. I think at some point there was actually kind of a thicker kind of brochure that we went through even downtown signage and all that, and basically was the net of that was everything else is staying the same, this is really just the only change, is that?
Well, at the, we did have a joint meeting with the Plan Commission and the Village Board as a committee of the whole towards the beginning of the year. And we reviewed some parts of the sign code, and the consensus from that review was to status quo was acceptable. The last part of the discussion tonight, we are going to touch on some sign topics. Staff will identify some suggestions in areas where we would like to go with that. Was just not prepared to have it all together tonight, and also looking for some more specific direction from the board on the sign aspect. So I would anticipate coming back with.
Okay, because I thought at one point, like the, what is it, like the realtor sign, like in front of an office building, I thought we were changing or at least documenting what that size now could be. Was that one of the changes we?
Oh, that'll be, I'll discuss that here next.
Oh, okay. And then the other, I guess, question that I had is, so we have a lot of, I guess, what I would describe as temporary signage that people put up, and we were really open, I think, on the temporary, and I think we were talking about firming that up a little bit as well, because I think technically you could take out a sheet and spray paint it, and that could be a temporary sign for a month or whatever we would allow. So I think you were firming that language up, which I thought was very positive. But who is the enforcer on that? So in other words, if somebody puts up a temporary sign and it's there for 2 years, who enforces that?
So our code enforcement, that's one of the, I think probably second to weed complaints. Temporary signage is probably one of the issues that occupies quite a bit of their attention. And so we work closely together on the permitting, identifying who has permits, and then enforcing the display dates that are allowed.
They have the tools that they need to be able to carry that out. Thank you.
And then the last proposed modification is not a new requirement. It's simply to introduce a recommendation or a guideline that we discussed at that joint meeting relative to drive-through facilities. We wanted to articulate a recommendation that those be set back at least 150 feet from a residential district. So that would be measured from the drive-through operation, whether it's the window order menu there or the pickup window. So measured from that to the adjacent home's property line. That would be a good rule of thumb. Again, the Plan Commission and the Village Board will have the ultimate ability to determine when the special use for drive-through is proposed. So if there are mitigating circumstances that would warrant or 130 feet is determined to be close enough, there is that flexibility. This isn't a hard and fast shall requirement, it's a should recommendation.
From my point of view, I think it's good that we specify the 150 feet. We've had plenty of discussion between 100 and 200, but we've had a couple of cases where this was reasonably controversial recently. After these businesses have gone in place, has there been any complaints?
I haven't heard specifically. I know of a few projects that would be interesting to talk to the neighbors just to hear, but I don't believe the planning department has received any calls with specific concerns relative to the newly approved or recently approved drive-through operations.
I haven't either. I just was curious if anybody had received complaints. It's one thing to anticipate a problem. It's another thing after it's been implemented and we reach a decision to track and see whether it truly is acceptable. And it seems like we're making decent decisions, and we're satisfying the neighbors. We listen. We come up with a compromise which we think serves a purpose, and so far it apparently has worked from what you're saying and from what I know as well. So.
I think it's a good start. I think the biggest challenge is typically the order station with the speakers. So I think if anytime we can put that into a site plan to try to keep a buffer between whether it's the building or whether it's some other buffer between that and residents, I think that's probably going to be more important than the 150. But at least there's something here to start with, and we go from there.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to switch gears here, and Trustee O'Rourke's questions were a perfect segue kind of into the second part of the discussion. This is, you can set aside the paperwork, and this is more for discussion. Relative to signage, I just wanted to introduce, as kind of a refresher to ground the discussion, what the legal framework is for the zoning code and specifically the sign code. In the zoning code overall, it has a 6 or 7 statements of our purpose and intent for the zoning code. I've highlighted the 3 or 4 that are most relevant to signage, but at the very core of what we do here at the Village of Plainfield, it's to protect the public health, safety, and general welfare of the village's residents. So that's a very broad statement, but that's at the core of our kind of police powers as the village, and any rules and regulations we adopt is to overall protect the health, safety, and welfare of the village and its residents. The zoning code helps to maintain orderly land use patterns, so really keeping things efficient and orderly. It protects the quality of life of our village residents and protects the character of our existing residential neighborhoods. So, kind of in the back of your mind, keep that's the core framework for the zoning code. And then specific to signage, the purposes and intent as set forth in the zoning code. The sign code is intended to regulate advertising, but to do so in a manner that reduces visual confusion and avoids safety concerns for drivers. So that really at the forefront, this is the first, it's in order, is to make sure that our signage isn't distracting, doesn't cause any safety concerns. On the flip side, the sign code does provide rights to the businesses to communicate to their customers in a reasonable, orderly, and effective manner. So that's clearly articulated as well. And then again, touching on the aesthetic, the appearance aspects, the sign code is intended to enhance the appearance of the village and preserve property values. So within reasonable discretion, the village is entitled to adopt rules to regulate signs to advance these stated purposes and intents. Some of the issues that staff is working on as we would prepare a proposed amendment to the sign code does include consideration of these LED or electronic message centers as the technology advances and becomes much more affordable to smaller businesses. It becomes commonplace to such a point that I would be surprised to receive a sign permit application for a monument sign for a new business that didn't include an electronic message center for for any national user. I would come to expect it. Another trend that is of some concern to staff is having new businesses incorporate their corporate branded color as an architectural element to the building. It really functions as an expanded sign. So to pick on a couple of users, we have AT&T or Napa Auto Parts are a few examples where a large portion of the elevation is really an expanded sign backdrop. Staff certainly recognizes the importance of working with our corporate partners and making sure that their brand identity can be seen and heard. But I think there are some ways to allow for that in a regulated manner. So that's another trend that we've seen. A third area, this is something that code enforcement is actively working on now, is vehicles, primarily like vans, that are being parked strategically to be a billboard, for lack of a better term. The zoning code does have some regulations that would restrict that, but staff may look to strengthen that to give code enforcement, again, the tools that are necessary to cut down on that. Regarding A-frame signs or sandwich signs, there are actually two kind of different issues here. In the downtown area, A-frame signs are permitted in our B5 or the Central Sign District. But what staff has noted is that a number of businesses that aren't right on Lockport Street are locating their A-frame signs on Lockport Street to draw attention that they're essentially on a side street. So staff would look to address that in the zoning code and also potentially provide some alternative sign opportunities that would eliminate the need for that for those businesses. Otherwise, there is a trend for these A-frame signs to be incorporated on businesses on B3 areas, Route 59 and Route 30 primarily. It's not currently permitted, so I guess simply for discussion or direction from the trustees is to work to address that through enforcement, or if there's any desire to revise the rules to allow A-frame signs in B3 areas. And then the last topic or trend is window signage. Our Sign code allows window signs to occupy 40% of a window area. It was originally, I think, the intent to be a company's logo, maybe the phone number, and businesses are now trying to fill in their entire windows with whether it's, we had one just across the street here, Under Armour, a dentist, you know, really using that window as a billboard. So staff would propose a few methods to address that. I do have just very brief discussions, considerations, not entirely recommendations, but some are recommendations and some are just points for a discussion for the board to provide some direction. For electronic message boards, if there is a concern that they become excessive in the future, we could introduce a separation requirement so that they can't be concentrated. For example, perhaps there would need to be separated by 100 feet or 200 feet as one option. We could identify that a special use would be required for an electronic message board of a certain size or at all. So those are just a few examples of how we could regulate electronic message boards. Relative to the colored backgrounds, I know that's an item that's reviewed during site plan review. One proposal would be to consider that colored area as part of the sign. So it would be subject to the same sign area regulations that we have currently. So businesses could have their corporate identity. It would just have to comply with the size restrictions of the sign code. In terms of the A-frame signs, at least in the downtown area, staff may explore the opportunity to have similar to our national sign plazas, you know, that direct for new subdivisions. If there may be an area to do that that's attractive, that is compatible and fits in downtown, but an opportunity for businesses to provide some identification that they're around the corner without cluttering our pedestrian areas with A-frame signs. So just a few recommendations. And regarding the A-frame signs outside of the downtown, you know, staff would welcome direction from the board on that. I know it's currently permitted in the downtown. It's intended to be more pedestrian oriented. So as you walk, you may note a restaurant special, you may note a shop's sale. So I think the character is really more intended for the downtown, but staff would be welcome to direction from the board. And then an easy fix relative to the window signage would be to reduce the permitted area from 40% to something more along the lines of 25%. And then the last point here, I know Trustee O'Rourke raised the question, of defining acceptable materials for temporary and permanent signs. So staff will continue to work on these areas and would be prepared to pull together a proposed sign code amendment based on additional direction and discussion from the board.
John, one of the first slides you showed was the purpose for the, that gives you the police power behind the ordinance. And I noticed that you had to protect the character of residential neighborhoods, but I didn't see that anything involving the downtown area to protect the character in the downtown area as well. Is that anywhere else in the code? Or is it just specified neighborhoods? Because I mean, the downtown is the jewel of the community, and I think it should be protected and encouraged development a certain way.
This is from the, it's like the introductory provision of the zoning ordinance. I think it's somewhat generic in terms of just protecting the character for our existing community. Staff could certainly add some specificity to it.
In the past, we've done a fair amount with the downtown area. We've forced certain kinds of signs. We prohibited a lot of neon in the downtown windows and so on. Is there not, somehow we were enforcing that from before. We had a bunch of options, you know, the corner restaurants wanted to put up something different, and we said, no, you got to have a hanging sign. It's got to be wood and some other things to try to maintain the character. It seems to me, I thought we had something that kind of controlled the downtown appearance, if you will.
Yeah, the The downtown area is part of the central sign district.
Okay.
So there are special sign provisions. The signage is intended to be integrated into the architecture of the building itself.
Right.
Interior lighting is prohibited, so the lighting has to be gooseneck or exterior lighting and so forth. There are some size limitations for monument signs.
And I think, at least from my point of view, that part is already effective. 'Cause we've used it to control what's happened. I think we've ended up with some pretty good results. I think our problem more generally is in non-downtown areas along 59, 30, and so on, where, as you indicate, there's a proliferation of technology. It's cheaper, better, glitzier. And how much of that do we want, and how does it impact the appearance of these shopping areas? I mean, I understand every business wants to promote their business, so they want more signs, if you will. Does that bode well for everybody, or do we have so many signs that actually impacts everybody's business? Because who wants to go to a gaudy place? I talked to Trustee Peck about the Ginza in Tokyo. You know, it's signs everywhere. It's it's pointless. I don't think that's what we want here, but we need to find some way of providing. The board needs to give you consistency on what we expect. I think you've outlined the kind of things which are important. We need to define those for you so that you can help to implement them. We need your recommendations, obviously, because you're dealing with it, but I think you need to have us come in and say, okay, we agree with this. This is important to us. This is what we want. We need this appearance. We need this. Can't have too many signs. Maybe you got to have a certain distance between them. Right now, I think the distance is uncontrolled, if you will. There's a lot of them are small, maybe 3 or 4 square feet, something like that, but they're all well lit. LED signs you can see a long way. So I think we need to come up with some definitions that we're willing to live with fairly soon. So
The downtown signs are to be incorporated in the building? Is that what I'm understanding?
The central sign district calls for a special treatment for signage in the downtown area, and so there's an additional review in terms of it ends up promoting the most common sign would be a sandblasted wood sign that's
And how do they allow the A-frames on the sidewalks then if it's supposed to be incorporated?
A-frames are, I'm sorry, that's a temporary sign, so permanent wall signage versus temporary signs.
Okay, the mayor's not here to make fun of me, so I'm gonna bring it up anyway. What about our little dancing guys out on the curbs? I mean, technically that's part of it. I'm sorry, but you know what I'm talking about. They're out there, and the other, which I could go either way, but I'm just saying that's we have to address that. And then another thing to bring up, some of these intersections are so busy and chaotic as they are now. That's where I really want to see the care taken with more electronic signs, because there's something on that sign and it's catching their eye, and people are, the traffic's coming from every direction and it's quite busy. Like, for example, 126 and 59 is just a horrific intersection if you're not paying attention, and stuff like that. It'd be detrimental to have like too much electronics at that type of intersection. Too much distraction. But the little dancing guy is part of the sign thing.
So that would technically be considered an attention-getting device that would be prohibited. So we can streamline that and work with code enforcement. And
Well, again, we have to be very mindful, because if it's not attached to the ground, and if somebody is carrying it around, that at that point it does get treated differently by the courts, and that is it's a different First Amendment thing that we have to be mindful of as we're trying to approach that particular issue.
So,
Kara?
Administrator Murphy, so a little dancing guy will not be in our sign code then?
More than likely, you won't see little dancing guy as the definition of what it
I
is.
stepped in for Mike. Okay. I had a serious question. Well, that was serious, but funny and serious. But I had a serious question. It's not funny. For business owners that already do have 40% or possibly more of their window decorated with signage, possibly painted or whatnot, are they going to be grandfathered in if we bring it down to 20%, or are they going to have to actually remove what they have in place?
staff's proposal would be that this would be for new.
For new,
And so
moving
any
forward.
current improvements would be
Okay, and
grandfathered.
the ones that are over 40% are going to be contacted and told, guess what, you are in violation of the ordinance and you've got to reduce it down to 40%. Okay.
I kind of neglected my introduction. This is really collectively, staff hopes furthers this kind of, at least some sentiment I recall from the strategic plan discussions of really trying to elevate the appearance of the village, the community character. I know we touched on some such aspects as parking lot maintenance and some other things. Really just looking at opportunities to tighten up the sign code a little bit to, at the end of the day, result in a community as we drive in and about and through that matches our vision for the future.
Sorry, my thought is, I think, when I think about all this and I take a step back, is to try to balance. So I think you have the desire from business owners that want to attract more business, and yet it has to be effective. So in other words, I think everybody will start reaching for straws when sales aren't there. You know, whether it's the flashing light, whether it's the guys walking down the street, whatever, balloons, anything and everything. And I think that's where we got to try to balance the desire of the business owners versus what is actually effective in drawing people to that shopping center, to that business. And it's, you know, the signage, unfortunately, is not always going to be the silver bullet that, you know, that business owners need or want in attracting new customers. But from our perspective, I think we have to help them for it to be effective. I don't know what that is, but obviously the intent of signage is visibility, to have people. So, and I think what they feel, business owners, when they start doing all the other stuff that maybe we don't like so much, the flashing lights, the balloons, the sidewalk signs in inappropriate locations, all those other things, the flag signs, is because they don't feel like they're getting visibility. So maybe the way to look at this, and I mentioned it before, and maybe it's different, but maybe it's worth considering, and that's the visibility allowance. So in other words, if a property or a wall sign sits further back from the main street, maybe we allow it to be bigger than normal, or bigger than a site that sits close to Route 59 or close to the Bramy Street, because there you can still see it. So if they sit further back, kind of like Ross came in and asked for. Now, whether that's appropriate or not, it was approved. But kind of the same principle. If you sit further back, it's harder to read. Maybe you get bigger signs. You sit closer, maybe it's smaller. So then, you know, maybe we get a little bit bigger signs than we might like, but we eliminate a lot of these other little signs that nobody likes.
Good point.
Well, one of the
I
things
agree.
that we are responsible for, and we're kind of the judges of, is the appearance. A business owner looks at it from the perspective of their own individual business, and as far as they're concerned, more is better. I'm not sure that we're in a position to judge whether more helps them with their business. I'm not sure that's our job, but I think we can judge whether the appearance of the overall enhances the village and makes the village an attractive place to do that. We have that overview that they don't have. And so I think we need to step back and set some rules that says, okay, we're going to be consistent. We want you to follow these guidelines because we think it's fair to everybody. You may not get everything you want. Technology is available to do even more than you used to be able to do, but we don't want all that. We want to limit that. And, you know, visibility is one aspect of it, but I think we need to take a look at the overall appearance, and that was, you know, part of what one of the Jonathan's charts showed. And I think that's our responsibility to figure what that means and translate that into science. And that's what was done, you know, a number of years ago and needs to be updated. And that's what we're trying to do now, because technology has changed, it's mushroomed, and there's a lot more light out there than there used to be. We didn't expect all that when we're working mainly on building signs, and we fussed with staples, you know, red background, that's what you're talking about, the big sign. There's some others that have come in and want to use our colors, and I think that as long as it's reasonably tasteful, it's not so bad. The gas station on Renwick and 30, you know, when I first came, proposed Go Gas City, I guess it was like a circus. And we said, no, that's not Plainfield. So we had to draw some lines there. That's what the board can do. And so I think we need to find out a way of putting in the sign language such that it makes it possible for Jonathan, when he deals with these people, to say, listen, this is what the board wants. This is what they expect. Now, this is all they're willing to live with. You can ask for a variance, but this is a reasonable, recent decision that says, this is what we want. If you want to fight it, fine, but, you know, at least the board will have our act together as to what we want, and I think one of the things we need to define in our own mind is what kind of appearance we want for this town. Because you could sure change it by lighting it up. We're on our way to doing that. A lot of small signs right now, but a few more big ones, and all of a sudden you've really changed our atmosphere, if you will.
Well, and I'm not saying necessarily bigger. Maybe bigger, but that's comparative to what? But I think it's a balance. So in other words, ideally we want to maintain the visual integrity of our town and not have all these other things going on. But to be honest, they are going on. And I'm guessing they're not necessarily part of the code right now, yet people are doing them. Why do they feel compelled to do it? My guess is because they think it's going to help their increased sales. So if we provide them the visibility from the initial sign, maybe they don't feel the desire to go and do all these other little things, I think, which takes away from the town more than maybe a sign on a building that's maybe a little bit bigger than we liked before. And I'm not saying it has to be gaudy. I'm just saying that's where I think the balance comes in, the aesthetically, but also enough for the business owner to attract the customers that they need to be successful.
Well, we had a recent example of that. Down by Lighting Source, they wanted a 100-foot sign, and we said, okay, 100-square-foot sign, 150 square feet, because there was a lot of businesses they had to really promote. But there's a big difference between a passive sign and an actively lit sign. If that were actively lit, the 150 square feet is, like a billboard almost. What's the size of our billboards? 200 square feet?
That's a great question. I've got to think about that. I don't know.
I tried to eyeball it from a distance. I think it's like 200, 140 to 200, somewhere in that range. But I may be wrong because you can't get close enough to measure them. But yeah, I think a key difference though is passive. Most of our signs are passive. The bigger signs, Walmart, Target, those sort of things on the road are passive signs. If all of a sudden we allow all those things to be lit and active signs, I think we've got an entirely different atmosphere. So it's not only sign size, I think it's the difference between passive and active. And I think we're better off, it's a quieter town or a more peaceful town if it's not as active. I hate to see us go a lot more lighted signs than we have now, if we could avoid them.
I agree
Really
with
big ones.
Trustee O'Rourke. I think that, I don't know that you're asking for flashing signs necessarily. I think the thing is, say like a Ross, it's a little bit larger because it's a little bit further back from the roadway. That makes sense. I do agree with you on that point, and I think that it would maybe get rid of a lot of the littler signs around town, because the business owners, if they are farther back from the roadway, what's the harm in making their sign a little bit larger? I don't see the harm.
Well, this has been great. This is exactly what staff hoped for in terms of being a conversation starter, to get some perspectives out there. Certainly the intention for this was not to attempt to go directly to the village board with a formal sign package proposal. I would anticipate this would be scheduled for a future committee of the whole discussion once some of these ideas are fleshed out and pulled together in a draft proposal for review. So this has been very helpful.
Can I make one last comment? You had asked about those A-frames outside of downtown, and my only concern with that is I think in downtown we have wider sidewalks, so you can accommodate those without reducing traffic or ADA issues. I think when you get into normal strip centers, you don't have sidewalks that are wide enough to accommodate and be able to do the ADA. So I think for that reason, I think it gets really tricky, and then people take them from the storefront and they move them out to the right-of-way, which is now the illegal part of it, correct? So I think off downtown, I think unless the sidewalks are wide enough to accommodate, I don't think it would make a lot of sense.
Anyway, thank you, Jonathan, for putting together the framework that gets us thinking on this process, so appreciate it. Nice charts.
Thank you, everybody, for your input. John, any last thing you need to cover?
John, is the Plan Commission going on next week?
There will be a meeting of the Plan Commission next Tuesday. There's a special meeting of the Historic Preservation Commission tomorrow. That's simply in case we have a number of commissioners who attend. Somebody from the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency is here for a site visit, and we noticed it to be conservative in the event that more than two commissioners wanted to attend.
Yeah, I'll show up for that, but the actual meeting on Thursday has been canceled, though.
Oh, yes, that's correct. This Thursday, canceled.
But the Plan Commission is still on, though, so. Want to read reminders?
You might want to note that in your reminders.
Coffee with the Mayor on Wednesday at 9 o'clock. The next village board meeting is October 17th at 7 p.m. Plan Commission meeting is October 18th, Tuesday. And the next Committee of the Whole workshop is October 24th.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you. That motion carries.